Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Last Thursday, three kibbutzim, Mifalsim, Nir Am, and Erez, the residents of those kibbutzim, were returned to their homes by the State of Israel. Just over 10 months after the attack by Hamas on October 7th, when these residents had to flee their homes and have been living since then in hotels, the state suddenly decided that they could go home. That there was no reason that their homes, which were not destroyed, unlike some of the other kibbutzim on that horrific day of October 7th, they, which are still standing, they could return home. It did not make a difference that the war in Gaza continues, that there's still explosions, there's still rocket attacks along the border, as we've seen over the last few days. No, the state decided these three kibbutzim, their residents could go home. And that's how on Thursday, Oriana Golan, her husband, and her three children went back to Nir Am. Today we talk to Oriana. We hear from her what it was like to return back to her house, what it's like to be there again with her children after the events of October 7th, after not having been there for 10 months. And how do you pick up those pieces and move on without knowing if you are safe and secure? I then speak with my JPPI colleague, Dr. Nurit Cohen, who has written a book about Jewish refugees from the 1948 Independence War, to hear from her what it was like historically back then when Jews were refugees in their country, how they were returned to their homes, and what does that historical context tell us about the present? Here we go. Oriana, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a great privilege to have you on the show. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your interest.
So you are now back in Nir Am with your three children, back in your old home, the one that you left on October 7th. It's been just over 10 months. It's now you got back Thursday. We're talking on Sunday, so it's just been 3 days, right? 3 nights that you've spent there, I guess, pretty much.
Yeah, we really just got back. The house is still a mess. We are still a mess. We're not really like we haven't landed. Like I think actually I was talking to a neighbor yesterday and she was like, so if we're going back home, and they're like, we are back home. So I think it will take us a few days to really realize that we are back home. And it's like all levels, like logistically, just a lot of it's like moving, it's weird, but because we had so much stuff in the hotel, 10 months, it's such a long time to be somewhere. And then we're going back home and we're just like rediscovering all our things at home, which is a very strange experience because it's like it's really familiar. It's all your stuff and it's your home. But even though we have been home a few times to visit and to pick up stuff, but it's this really weird experience of familiarity and still strange. So it's very emotional these days. Like I see people just like across the street and like just in the playground, and everybody has this weird look in their eyes, like, yeah, we're home, we're scared about it, and we're also happy because I remember that, oh, I have a house, I have a home, I have my own little corner in the world. And it's a great feeling because we didn't have it for the past 10 months. It's very complex
I'm
and like a
sure.
lot of
Oriana,
contradiction feelings.
yeah. So October 7th, I mean, basically what happened is last week, the government, after 10 months of kibbutz Nir Am, your home, Mifalsim, kibbutz Erez, some of the kibbutzim that were not, the infrastructure, the homes were not destroyed during the October 7th attack. They were told that the state is no longer going to be paying for the hotels, and that you guys have to make a decision. Do you go home or do you not? And I've heard some stories of families that have really had dilemmas and difficulty deciding what to do. What was it like for your own personal family?
It was very hard. This whole year, it's not like from day one they told us, okay, you will be here 10 months and then you'll go back home. Like every few weeks, we didn't know what's going on. We didn't know if we could stay at the hotels. We were ordered to make choices from the government, from Tkuma, the body that the government initiated to deal with all these questions, to decide as a kibbutz what we want for the next step. And every time we voted on an option that they gave us, it ended up just collapsing and not happening at the end. So at first we were supposed to go to this settlement called the Entzurim, and then which was a few after options that we chose, and it was this really long, very tiring and hard procedure until we got to the solution that they said, okay, we have a complex of building in Ashkelon that
Right.
you will move to. So we started working towards that, and moving as a kibbutz, it's more than just like family, just putting everything on a truck and moving, because we have our education system and children from like babies and toddlers and like all these systems that need to work and have staffs that needs to be recruited, and it's pretty complex. And we started working towards that when we actually realized that the constructor of the building said, okay, it won't be ready on time, and they said we can't stay at the hotels after August 15th. So people are just slowly just got so exhausted of like not getting answers and being in this situation where you have like zero control of your life. And they started thinking, okay, we prefer to go back to the kibbutz, even though we don't feel it's safe because there's still a war going on, just like kilometer from my home, So there are war sounds and there are still hostages in Gaza, and it's still very unclear what will be in Gaza the day after the IDF pulls out. I mean, what's going to happen? We still have no answers. We're still in a very big uncertainty. So
Oriana, what do you tell your kids? I'm sure they're asking you all these questions. What do you tell them?
actually, I was trying not to tell them all the changes because it was like I'm just saying like a bit of what happened. There were like I think like maybe 5 or 6 options that were changing. Like just you wake up in the morning and you wait for an announcement. Oh, so not Ashkelon, maybe Kiryat Gat. Oh, not Kiryat Gat, and I was trying not to tell them everything that's going on because I thought it's going to really drive them crazy. But even the little that I have told them has made them feel very insecure. Like, is it safe to go back home? Okay, so if we're not going back home, how come some other families are going back home? And if it's not safe to go home, then how come we eventually ended up going home? And it's my little one, she's just 4, and she was like saying, "Oh, you have to decide, is the hotel our home or is the home the hotel?" She was like, "Understand what's going on?" And I was actually just visiting a neighbor with her yesterday, and we were walking in the street, and then I turned to go like in the house, and I was sure she's coming after me. And as I looked back, she wasn't there, and I got nervous, and I was like, "Where are you?" And then I found her, like she just kept on going down the street because she didn't remember where the house is.
Wow.
She's only 4, and 10 months of her life she was living in a hotel. So it's a big part of time for her. And that was weird. So we're just
What
trying
is
to
the feeling? Do you feel safer? Do you feel more secure today? I mean, despite knowing that there are these sounds, there are explosions, there is a war not that far away, there is still fighting, but do you feel secure?
uh I think the worst thing is that I kind of lost the faith that if something happened, for sure the army and the government will know how to deal with it. So it's like we're all the time looking to see, okay, where are the soldiers? Like there were tanks outside of the one of the gates of the kibbutz, and then they were not there one morning. So you can see all the correspondence in the group of the kibbutz, like, where are the tanks? Why are they going? Who is keeping up on us? Like, what is going on? What are the arrangements? Like, before we didn't know exactly how many soldiers and what's going on. And you really see that people are now like, how many soldiers are guarding the kibbutz? Like, people are very alert. They want to know that things are safe. And Like we lost the, like before we were like, okay, there is army. Of course, they know what they're doing. And now we really want to know every detail. How many troops, how many soldiers, how many weapons. So I think it answers your question that things are very tense. People do not feel safe. You
Sure.
know, like we're talking about, can we go jog in the kibbutz? Like I will not go outside the kibbutz. Before we would go like, just jogging or just walking in the fields. And I was just talking to a friend yesterday. She was like, okay, I'm not going out of the kibbutz for sure. But even inside the kibbutz, I don't feel safe just like going for a walk just next to the fence because it's so close. There are some points of the kibbutz like you can see Gaza. You can just see buildings, you can see a city. And it's so
Tell
we
me,
are home and
your personal story. You're originally from Jerusalem. You had moved with your husband out to Kibbutz Nir Am a bunch of years ago, looking for a different type of lifestyle.
we were actually students here. A lot of people got to this area because of Sapir College, which is a
Uh-huh.
very good college that is just here, very close to Sderot. So a lot of the young families in the kibbutz are actually people that met in Sderot and lived here as students and just fell in love with this area because it's really a great place to live in. Like it's we always say, it's heaven. It's until it's hell. It's like it's very nice place, and we just wanted to stay here. And when we started to want to just build a house, and we already had three children, we're like, okay, this is the place we want to live in. We already had friends here. Um, it is very weird. Like my family doesn't really understand why I'm not going back to Jerusalem, but I feel I only realized it this year. There is something about choosing the place you want to live, which is very powerful. Like I'm not even talking about this that I built a house 3 years ago and I'm still have this mortgage that I'm paying, and it's not very easy to just go and rent out a house. But it's also this emotional thing that the kids are already very much bonded into the kibbutz. Like my older son, he's starting ninth grade now, and he was like, I won't start any other place. The only place in the world I want to live in is Kibbutz Nir Am. And no way you are moving me anywhere. So he was very harsh about it. And he's usually very a gentle and like pleasing child. And it was really obvious to me that after this year that he went through, which was very hard for him actually, like he really didn't want to start something new. And we are not in the best position. Like we don't have a lot of energy now. We're still like collecting all the pieces of our life, and just to think of like ripping off all of us and starting somewhere new, just the thought of it is just making me so tired.
Yeah.
And there's something so comforting in going back home. It's just like just want to go home
I
after all
can I,
this
I can
mess.
only I can only imagine, but I know that you do yoga instruction, and
Yeah.
you run yoga groups and different classes. And right before October 7, you were working with somebody else nearby, a Pilates teacher, and even opening and expanding
Wow,
business.
you really did your research.
Yeah, I try to. So obviously that was put on hold, I'm guessing, to some extent. Tell us what happened. How did you keep the business going over the last 10 months, and what are your plans now that you're back home? What are your plans for the future?
It's also a thing because I started teaching yoga as a second career. And I started this whole thing here. And I've been teaching for like 4 years now in the kibbutz, which was amazing. And I had a friend from Kfar Aza that we wanted to open a place together. And actually, like I think 2 days before October 7th, we had this very long conversation, like how we're doing it, and like just starting to be very concrete about what's the next steps. And it was all pretty much gone to waste this year. I can say that it's amazing that the Sha'ar HaNegev, the council, have been paying me throughout this whole year to teach yoga to people evacuated in Tel Aviv. So I have been teaching this whole year people from my kibbutz and from other kibbutzim in Tel Aviv. So I was able to keep on teaching throughout the year, which was very, very good for me and I think for the people. Um, the minute we got to the hotel after October 7th, I immediately searched for a place to teach. And I was saying, it's for me more than it is for them. Like people say, oh, it's amazing that you did it and that you kept it going on and that you didn't give up. And I was like, I have to do it. If I'm not teaching yoga a few days, I'm starting to, it's starting to be itchy for me. It's something that I really need to do for myself as well as for people. And it is a very good feeling that I can do something that actually helps people
Yeah.
with all these days of anxiety and tension. Um, and I am also, I think that it was not such a difficult year for me because I felt that I had tools to deal with because of, just like using breath practice and
Mhm.
just like having all these methods that help me stay very grounded. And it was a very interesting year. It had a lot of bad things, but it also had good things. But yeah, now we have to see what's going on. Like I feel that everybody's changed this year. Like things will not be the same, not for me and not for everybody. So a lot of family are getting divorced. I was just talking to a few friends yesterday. I'm also starting to study some other things that I never thought I would study. And I think we are all different and we can't go back to everything that was before. And I think trying to go back exactly to how things were before is a mistake because this changed us.
Yeah.
And if we have to realize that.
Well,
Well,
Oriana, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure that everybody who's listening to you is wishing you and your family only a better future and a secure and stable landing and return home. So we hope and pray with you and the kids that it goes well and it goes smoothly and things are quiet, which is what everybody just wants at the end of the day. I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
we really want it to be peaceful. We want the hostages back. And we want to feel like we have government that we can trust. This year hasn't made it easier for us. We felt like we've been led into lies that were not coming to reality at the end. And we're just pretty much bruised here in the kibbutz now, trying to pick up the pieces and making life because it is an amazing place.
It's like you said, it's
Thank
heaven
you.
until it's hell. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, we hope it will be heaven for you. So thank you very
thank
much,
you.
Oriana. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Be
Bye.
well. Hi, Nurit. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're talking because of the return of residents of Kibbutz Nir Am, Mefalsim, Erez back to their homes. These were, like I said in the introduction, these were the kibbutzim that, while there were the attacks going on into these specific kibbutzim, the homes were not destroyed. And therefore, unlike Be'eri, near Oz, Nachal Oz, Kfar Aza, and others, the home's still intact. The state felt that after 10 months, it was okay now to return people to their homes. And just hearing from Oriana Golan, a resident of Nir Am, and just the overall anxiety of what it's like to be back home is definitely moving, I would say. But I wanted to get from you some historical context because you wrote a book about that actually won awards here in Israel for military history, the Yitzhak Sadeh Award, but one of the few women, actually, have to say, who's won an award for military literature in the state of Israel. So that's just an added benefit along the way. But your book is about Jewish refugees during the War of Independence. I'm just curious, first, before we talk about contemporary, what happened back then?
Well, during the Israeli War of Independence, 10% of the Israeli population in 1948 were evacuated from their homes for different periods of time. Sometimes it lasted for 2 or 3 months, and sometimes it lasted more than a year. That people couldn't return to their homes, whether their homes were still attacked or bombed, or whether their homes were destroyed because their settlements, kibbutzim or moshavim, were occupied by enemy forces, and people didn't have a place to go back to. This was, of course, one of the greatest challenges of the Israeli side in the war, and the fact that the Israeli side was able to overcome the refugee problem that he dealt with was one of the secrets for his victory in the war.
So before, why was it such a big challenge, and how did it overcome it?
Okay, if we were to compare the numbers for the current numbers of the Israeli population, then Israel would have to dealt today with 700,000 refugees. That's the scale of the problem that Yishuv, the state of Israel before it was born, had to deal with during the War of Independence. And of course, it was during a difficult war, the most difficult war that Israel ever faced, including the current war. And the secret for overcoming this problem was basically the good way, the good infrastructure that Israel had before it was even established, the organizations, the institutions, and the various variety of organism that the Yishuv had that was able to face this problem, to feed the refugees, to give them shelter, to give them medical care, to give them education lessons for the kids that were evacuated, and so on. The second secret for the victory or the overcoming of this issue was the solidarity that Yishuv had among the different groups that built it. And it is common to look in a nostalgic kind of way back and say, well, back then we were all united and we used
to get along. Yes.
Yeah. But of course, if we sharpen our memory, we will remember that during the war there were several, I would say, interfights.
Altalena was one perfect example when Haganah forces open fire on the Irgun or the Etzel,
or vice versa,
of the
that
Menachem Begin and try to sink the ship that was trying to bring weapons. I mean, there was a lot of that interfighting that was taking place.
That was we were that close from a civil war. Less than a month after Israel was established. So the secret was overcoming those huge differences and find common ground and act as one force despite all the disputes and arguments, and this unity, this ability to build common grounds and build common goals, that was also a very important tool in the Israeli side, and it enabled him to win the war.
We kind of had that in the beginning of this war, right? After October 7th, where you saw so many people come together, political differences and divisions thrown to the side, stories and hopes that people had that maybe the ultra-Orthodox are suddenly going to start drafting into the IDF, but really how the left and right divide seemed to be no longer be as prominent as it was on October 6th. Sadly, I think 10 months into this war, we kind of know that it was like putting a Band-Aid to a gunshot wound. It stopped the bleeding temporarily, but it didn't really deal with the problem at its root. But I'm curious your thoughts now as you see, I mean, I spoke with Oriana for this episode. I have other friends who I know. I have a friend from another kibbutz who was supposed to be sent back home, could not yet go back home, and has decided to fly to Asia for about a month of a vacation with the kids, just to not to have to deal with it. And I mean, who can't judge these people,
Right.
because I do understand that there is, yes, their homes are intact, okay, but that's only one component of the reality, right? This is an active war zone still.
Mhm.
And as much as they want to feel that, yeah, Israel's fighting, Israel's in Gaza, we're degrading Hamas's capabilities, Hamas cannot carry out an attack like this in the future, but you don't know until you know. I mean, that was the assumption also. So how do you, Nurit, view everything that's going on right now?
Well, first, let me say that back in 48, there were several cases where kibbutzim and moshavim returned to their homes because it looked okay to come back. And soon enough, the fire opened up again, and they had to re-evacuate their
Really? Wow.
their homes again. So there were cases that they decided, well, it's safe to bring back the kids back to the kibbutz, let's say in Ramat HaKovesh, that's a kibbutz near Kfar Saba, in the center of Israel today, and back then also. And it seemed so safe to return them, and soon enough, gun shoots started again from Tira, a large Arab city, and they had to re-evacuate themselves. So that is a scenario that everyone has to take into account when we are dealing with returning the refugees and the evacuees today. And of course, it is, I would say another thing. But obviously, the war did, the total victory is still very far away, and the fighting is still going on. And ordering those people who suffered so much to go back to their homes now seems like a irresponsible thing to do. And I would add another thing, and that is based on the experience in 48. When you're dealing with communities, when you're dealing, of course, with people, you have to look. You have to act in great sensitivity when you're dealing with communities, and you have to remind yourself that you are dealing with a living organism, and you can't put orders and deal with harshness against them, because you're going to dismantle the very thing that holds them together. And of course, there are numbers and there are budgets, and you have to take into account everything. But it would be a great mistake to deal with those communities through numbers and budgets and
the lens of how much it costs. But I'm curious then, what do you think the state is thinking? Like, what is it? Just money? Is it also, maybe it's also this attempt by the government to show that things are fine, that we're back to normal, that we are winning? We know that Netanyahu has his, you mentioned the total victory that's still far away. He's got the total victory slogan, right? Nitzachon muchlat, right? He's even, they've printed hats with the slogan on it. I mean, it's part, maybe it's part of a way of also showing the Israeli public, here, people can go home. We're winning the war.
Well, I think it's a dangerous bet, and I would think twice and more than twice, betting with the lives of these people in particular. Let me also say that in 48, when first the approach of the leadership was against evacuating people because of moral reasons and propaganda reasons, and how it would look outside the Israeli borders, and etc. And the unanimous approach was, we're not evacuating anyone. And soon enough, when the war started, especially after the fall of Gush Etzion, those settlements near Jerusalem that were conquered by enemy forces, by Jordanian and other Palestinian forces, most of the leadership understood that it was a wrong thing to think and to act to, and they quite rapidly changed their policy during the war. If they changed the conception, if you will, there was a concept, and they changed it during the fighting. And one of the first, one of the strong signals of this change was that it was decided that none of the evacuees can return to their homes without the approval of the military command in this area. So back then, the leadership understood the sensitivity and the seriousness of this kind of resolutions, and they really dealt it with great care and delicate care. And I think we could expect the least from today's government and decision makers to do the same.
We would hope that that's possible from today's government and our decision makers, but sadly, all indications have been over the last 10 months that this is not exactly the government that we can expect to get sensitivity and responsibility and accountability from when it comes to decisions that they make. One last thing, Nurit, when we look throughout history, right? If throughout Israel's wars, really the only two that you've had this massive displacement of people was the Independence War and is the current war, right? When in Israel's other big wars, whether it was the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, the first Lebanon War was just in Lebanon anyhow, we didn't have that type of, and I mean, I think it's just interesting in of itself how this is something that happened in the beginning of us as a state, and how it's something that we have now 76 years later, when we're supposed to be at our strongest moment as a state in terms of military power, economic power, and even social resilience. I mean, what does that tell you?
Well, I think one of the reasons that these two wars are involves dealing with a refugee problem or evacuee problem is the length of the war. The War of Independence lasted more than 1 year and more than 1.5 years. It depends on the different regions and in the different parts of the state. After the War of Independence, one of the main pillars of the security policy of Israel was aiming towards a short war, understanding that the Israeli state cannot endure lasting wars, not in any aspect, not in the when you look at it through the economic angle or whatever. So this was one of our main policies, aiming towards a short war. And we can ask
that's something that's also now, is we don't have a short war. This war has been going on for over 10 months by now, right?
And now we can, but sadly, now we're asking ourselves, is this war lasting for a good reason?
Right.
Isn't it didn't we reach a point where we should end the war, cut our losses, collect our wins, and end the war? And I think this is a beginning of an answer to your question.
Very interesting. Well, Dr. Nurit Cohen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being and sharing the historical context and comparison between 1948 and now in 2024. And to our listeners and viewers, thank you very much for joining us. You can find us on Thursday for another episode